To follow up the historical supernatural mayhem that is the Chinese gold murders, I couldn't think of a more opposite yet familiar companion novel than our sixth place winner. I'm proud to grant G.K. Chesterton's The Innocence of Father Brown this position in our rankings. Father Brown is a detective who we've had literally tens of requests to cover, and that's pretty high for us. He's an unassuming father of the cloth who uses a slow but determined application of observation and light questioning in order to force his suspects to confess their sins. I can't imagine he's much fun at parties, though. The Innocence is not just one story, but 12 short ones. They vary wildly in terms of complexity and tone. The first story we are presented with, The Blue Cross, doesn't properly introduce Father Brown until the very last page of its mystery, where he is found attempting to convert a hardened criminal from his sinful ways. And really, that's what makes him so compelling. You get the sense as you read through these works that he's figured out the mystery of who and how quite quickly, maybe even most of the why. But Father Brown wants to approach each and every crime and criminal with a level of care and love that his God would want from him. And so he spends a good amount of the page time assessing the spiritual goodness of those around him and seeing whether the criminal, who isn't always a murderer, mind you. The great criminal Flambeau is a master thief who eventually turns into a sidekick of Brown's investigators, a walking, talking testament to Brown's redemptional abilities. He's seeing whether the criminal is able to reflect on their actions and change their outlook on life. There are certainly some puzzles that are more about uncovering a clever trick that G.K. Chesterton has put together for just this occasion. He is known for being a master of mystery fiction and of paradoxical writing in particular, so many of his stories involve what seems to be a fantastical element, like The Hammer of God, for example, in which a man is found dead with a tiny hammer blow inflicted. The witnesses have no clue how or when he was struck and point out that the hammer should have been much larger to inflict death in the manner that it did. And there is some time spent dwelling on whether or not a woman could lift a larger hammer, while a man would not bother with such a small hammer in the first place. It is, unfortunately, at the very least, a blatantly sexist discussion, which, again, unfortunately, is also a sign of the times. In any case, Chesterton points out this paradox that exists between genders and hammers, and then points out that the smith who made the hammers, our primary suspect, was out of town at the time the hammer blow fell. So now we are left with a hammer no one would use, inflicting a larger blow than it has any right to, in the middle of a town where no one was around. The Father Brown novels are packed with both small and large paradoxes like this one, and of course the paradox itself turns out to be the key to understanding the mystery and catching the killer. This is the capital F fun of reading Chesterton's work, that though we are often dealing with the grim reality of murder, there is a soft-heartedness and even a whimsy to Father Brown's investigations that help keep the stories from becoming too dark. The mysteries themselves are actually not too difficult to pick overall, though there is at least one whose solution is a little too esoteric for most people to guess on a first read. There are exceptions, of course. See our episodes on the subject. The reality of approaching Golden Age mysteries with a modern mindset is that these stories will often give themselves away by premise. I'm again going to avoid giving the exact answer to the puzzle, but when I read the title, The Final Story, The Three Tools of Death, my initial reaction was, well, if there's three tools, three options being provided, then it's either all or none of them. This is a rule laid down from before I was ever born in the mystery genre, that when a novel insists that the reader choose between a couple of different options, the only way to win is not to play, or to gamble on Father Brown, of course. I would be remiss to dismiss the titular priest and his story, except that there barely is one. The short stories don't concern themselves with a complicated backstory for the character. He exists in the here and now to solve crimes and go on short, neatly packaged adventures. I will say that I find the character most compelling when he's able to sit back from the mystery and really dig into the surrounding story. The Sign of the Broken Sword, for example, is almost all story. It's about a journey of Father Brown and his newly acquired apostle Flambeau traveling through a apparently Scandinavian hell to find any mention of a fallen general named Sir Arthur St. Clair, who clearly Father Brown has found something very peculiar about surrounding his death. He begins the investigation cryptically. Now that he has a sidekick to bounce off of, he asks Flambeau and complicitly the reader where one would hide a pebble. And Flambeau responds, on the beach. And then Brown asks where you would hide a leaf. And Flambeau responds, in the forest. Brown is flagging to the reader here that he already knows the physical truth of the story about this hidden thing, whatever it might be. He knows the truth long before he sets out on his Scandinavian pilgrimage. But he does have his reasons for being there, and he begins to tell Flambeau a story, one of war and romance and revenge. There are twists and turns, but Father Brown, like a bloodhound, stays focused on uncovering the whole truth of the matter. Watching how Brown would retell a sensitive story and how he decides whether or not it is worth telling the world the truth that he discovers is fascinating, and gives us a fantastic study of the core of his being and the lengths that he will go to assuage his Christian soul. The Innocence of Father Brown is an excellent example of a classic detective series from the Golden Age and stands above the rest through its own religious framing, being very, very strange and unique in the genre. The quality of Brown's character in both the written and unwritten sense shines through even today. I think the main barrier to entry is the frankly outdated politics of the novel. The novel doesn't spend a great amount of time quoting scripture at the reader, but there are certainly some sexisms and some descriptions that border on the anti-Semitic. For that reason, some readers might find it difficult to make it all the way through to the end, but the experiment of such a doggedly soft-hearted character like Father Brown alone makes it an interesting series to pick up and have a read through. This is Death of the Reader. You're listening to 2SCR 107.3.